Managing Director Brenton Whittenbury says he's immensely proud to be part of his family's retail story that began with the opening of Judds Shoes, I can remember that, in the city in 1868, and now includes, but I remember Judds Shoes, it was around, wasn't it? Yeah. And now includes Grundys and Barlow shoe stores across Adelaide and Victor Harbour. Along with many accolades, in July 2011 the business was inducted into the Australian Family Business Hall of Fame, and just a couple of weeks ago was a recipient and the winner of the Best Small Retailer Award in this year's The City Awards. Please welcome Brenton Whittenbury to tell us more about this hugely successful South Australian family business.
Thank you, Heidi. I really hope I look that good when I turn 150. And thank you, Janine, too, for that walk a mile in my boots. I did that a couple of years ago, and it's a great morning, so if you get the opportunity to get out there, please do. There's something special about walking with a few thousand people that are all got that common cause. Well, good afternoon. About 5 years ago, before I joined this great club, I remember speaking here about the shoe industry and retail, and more specifically my business, Grundys and Barlow Shoes. Since then, a lot has changed, and significantly we are celebrating a really special anniversary this year. This year South Australia is 182 years old, and my family has been selling shoes in Randall Street, Randall Mall, for 150 of them. In my time today I want to give you a taste of our history and also share some thoughts as to how and why we have lasted 7 generations in a business environment that tends to conspire against businesses like ours. I'll also touch on some of the key changes we have weathered and some of the challenges we face into the future. In a moment, we'll watch a short video that gives a précis of our history. Our own Jeffrey Reid, sitting just over there, thank you Jeffrey, put this together, and he's done a great job of it too. But first I just want to set the scene with a bit of a quiz, and so the first correct answer to each of these questions, I'm looking to give out one of these limited edition, much sought after commemorative shoe horns. So let's see if this is going to work for us. Okay, we started in 1868, and I'm going to ask if each of these events occurred before, during or after 1868, okay? First in, best dressed. Adelaide Oval opens. After. Well done. Pass it along. Adelaide Oval opened in 1873. Central Market opens. After? No, it was after. Well done, Elizabeth. Thank you, Heidi. Construction of St Peter's Cathedral. After? I know Tony needs a shoehorn, so I'm only going to give him that one. It was after. Construction actually commenced in 1869, the year after, but it didn't finish until 1904. That's a partly completed version there, I suspect. Sir Henry Ayres, Premier of South Australia. Well, you're all correct because it's before, during and after. Stump jump plough invented. After 1876. Who's claiming that one? John Harmer. Peter Sutton can have the Henry Ayres one. and finally, the Adelaide GPO opens in King William Street. After 1872. Okay, so you can see that in 1868 Adelaide was a very different place to how it is now. But it was developing very quickly. A lot of those things happened in the 1870s. It was a real boom time. Let's watch the video. Okay, let's watch the video. Yeah.
Our story begins in 1855 aboard the sailing ship Taymouth Castle, bound for South Australia. William and Jane Judd and their son Thomas of 10 years are making their passage to start a new life in the fledgling colony. In a strange twist of fate, young Thomas, skylarking on a pitching, rolling deck, trips and falls. His leg is broken. Still weeks from their new home, Thomas's broken leg is poorly set by a suspect ship's surgeon, unwittingly setting in motion events that established our family firm 150 years ago. With no one in Adelaide able to provide corrective shoes, young Thomas, guided by his bootmaker uncle, learns the trade and makes his own boots. A perfect fit, and the family firm is born in their home at Woodford, Adelaide, and soon flourishes. In 1868, Thomas marries Elizabeth, and amidst the clatter of horse-drawn carriages and the bustling cries of fruit and vegetable traders in Adelaide's East End markets, the newlyweds proudly open their Star Boot Manufactory in East Terrace. Boots and shoes are tailor-made on the premises, as was the cobbler's trade at the time. A year later, Clarence William Judd is born. With Star Boots booming, they not only need to advertise for more staff, but also move to larger premises at 268 Randall Street. Clarence, now 17, joins the family firm to help meet their growing sales of boots to the workers of the East End produce markets. We like to think of him as the original tap dog of that era. Clarence does well in the business and, turning 23, marries the lovely Ellen, and the following year Vera Millicent Judd is born. 25 years later, Vera Judd meets the dashing Stanley Whittenbury, and he soon enters the family business. He brings that entrepreneurial flair a growing business needs. A year later, he expands the firm with the acquisition of Grundys Shoes at 188 Randall Street. The Roaring Twenties taste for high fashion drives the establishment of another retail store, Judds Shoes, on the corner of Randall Street and Regent Arcade, which becomes Adelaide's first and foremost ladies' fashion shoe boutique, stocking the latest ready-to-wear styles from around the world. With Stanley now running the business, Clarence combines his passion for photography and travel to join the first commercial motor car crossing of Australia from Adelaide to Darwin and return. The resulting film is a priceless record of that motor tour. The business prospers, and the next generation, Ralph, Len and Vern Whittenbury, are granted equity in the family firm in 1942. They soon open new Judds shoe shops at Glenelg and De Costa Arcade and Daintywalk in Randall Street. A highlight of these years still occurs today, the annual staff dinner. In 1962, the family acquires the A.W. Barlow Shoe store at 67 Randall Street. The story goes that on hearing from Jack Humphreys about the impending sale of Barlow's, Vern sprints from Grundys up Randall Street to number 67 and says, "I'll buy it." What a great decision that proved to be. By the 1980s, the next wave of Whittenburys, Paul, Randy and Brenton, take the firm to yet another level. They purchase the Grundys building in Randall Street and open new Judds stores at City Cross and Tea Tree Plaza, leading to a total revamp of all the Judds stores, now 5 in number. Barlows is also refurbished and Grundys stores open at Glenelg and Victor Harbour. Gavin, Damien and Sarah have shifted the focus to the two famous flagship brands, Grundys and Barlows. Offering a wide range of the world's leading shoe brands and styles, Grundys has reinvented itself to become the go-to store for shoes to fit your lifestyle. Barlow's focus is on Doc Martens and Converse in a location adjacent to the university precinct. There is much to celebrate of the remarkable 150-year story of South Australia's oldest continuous Randall Street trader. As the 7th generation now start to join us, we are, and will always be, proud of our story. One family, 7 generations, 400 staff, 5 million pairs of shoes, and counting. Here's to the next 150 years.
Thank you for that, and I'm sure you recognise the voice-over artist as well. Thank you, Jeffrey. Okay, so that's where we've come from, but what are some of the strategies that have kept us going? You've probably heard that there are 3 rules in retail. There's location, location and location. The East End market was the perfect spot to start up. It had a daily supply of workers needing good boots. They had cash in their pockets from selling their produce, and all Thomas had to do was position himself between the market and the bank. When it came time to expand, progressively better locations up Randall Street were sought, sometimes by purchasing existing stores and sometimes by opening new ones. Grundys on the corner of Synagogue Place, then up to the corner of Regent Arcade with Judds, and Barlows in one of the best spots on the mall. On the decline of the East End market in the late 70s, and after trading there for over 100 years, that original store was closed. It was no longer a good location. And yes, that is me in the doorway. Once you have the right location, I believe there are 4 more variables to get right. You need to control your overheads in business. Those fixed expenses can really knock you around. You incur them regardless of how you're trading. There's an unusual example up on the screen. It's a letter from our landlord at the East End Market. It's dated 1931, the height of the Depression. It's only short, so I'll read it out. Dear Sirs, re-rental. In reference to your letter of the 14th of November and the interview of this morning between Mr. C.W. Judd and 2 of my directors, Messrs. Cowling and Parkes, I am instructed to confirm arrangements agreed upon, i.e. that the tenancy be continued at a weekly rental of £2 10 shillings, being a reduction of 10 shillings per week. Now, for those unfamiliar with pre-decimal currency, that equates to a reduction from $6 to $5 a week, or about 17%. It's not likely to happen now, I don't think. And our strategy now is rather than be at the mercy of a landlord, even though they do occasionally reduce your rent, we own the properties that we trade from, and I think that is really the key to us being able to compete. Secondly, you need to look after your supply lines. And here's another early example from 1946. That's a letter outlining the terms of a loan from my grandfather to a supplier, Albert Henry. I, Albert Henry of 5 Neat Street, Northcote, in the state of Victoria, hereby acknowledge having received from SWF Whittenbury of 201 McGill Road, Nord, in the state of South Australia, the sum of £500, which the said SWF Whittenbury is advancing to me for the purposes of setting up a factory for the manufacture of footwear. In consideration of the advance, I agree to give him priority of supplies of footwear manufactured by me, and I further agree to repay this advance without interest at my earliest opportunity. So that was one way of guaranteeing supply. I think that could incur the wrath of the ACCC these days, but our strategy is to always look after our creditors as well. We pay them on time, we pay them early if they offer discount, and we figure that it's then in their best interest to look after their good customers. Thirdly, you need to have good product. And this is a tough one. This is the hardest part about running a retail business, I think, is doing your buying. Because it's not something, your consumers' tastes are not really something that you have control of. And all you can really do is align yourself with good brands, do your research, hope that you pick the styles that your customers like, and it often comes down to gut feel. You know, sometimes they just don't sell. It's not a perfect science. But thankfully, you do always need something for the sale tables. And finally, staff. Good staff. And wouldn't business be easy if we didn't have staff issues to deal with? But with the right training and respect, you can form some great partnerships with your staff. And we've had staff stay with us for over 50 years. And many of our staff have returned to us after being young employees. They've returned after bringing up their family. So, to me, that's the recipe for a good retail business. Location, cost control, supply, product, and staff. All right, so what changes have we seen in 150 years? Well, what haven't we seen? When that first shopfront opened, it was a cobbler's shop. Customers went in, chose the style and colour they wanted. There was probably only a choice of an Oxford lace or a Derby lace, a boot or a shoe, maybe black or brown. The customers measured up and then they waited a week or two for the shoes to be made. Since the 1920s, and you remember that Judds shop that my grandfather opened on the corner of Regent Arcade, since then you've been able to try shoes on and walk home in them. Now I liken that change as being as big a threat to the cobbler as online purchasing is to bricks and mortar retailing today. And we all know what happened to cobblers. So keeping up with technology is a constant challenge for any business. Fashion. Right, so another major change has been the way we all interpret fashion. Come on, Tony. He wears Rockports now, but... So who owned a pair of platform shoes in the 70s? Yeah. And ladies, who wore metallics in the 80s? Maybe not that heel height, but I'm sure you had a pair of metallics. They were looks that defined an era, and that doesn't happen now. Fashion today is much more diverse and personal, which makes it harder to predict and means that when you're buying, you have to spread out with a lot more different styles. And so therefore you have less volume behind each look. So the buy is much more spread. And that in turn creates a lot more oddments at the end of the season. And you don't make money out of oddments. So for that reason, we're pretty much out of fashion now. And we're concentrating on comfort and classic brands. Cash. Everyone shopped with cash once upon a time. When I use cash now, I get called old school. We take Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Diners, UnionPay, ZipPay, Afterpay, PayPal, etc., etc. And they all take their cut. They all have a fee. So there's really no such thing as a free lunch. But it does mean you can shop even when there's nothing in your bank account. And that has to be a good thing, for retailers anyway. Online, we can now sell to the whole world, but so can everybody else, of course. And this is a revolution that's happening before our eyes. Having said that, and with all the hype of online sales, there's still less than 10% of our total, and we have a pretty good online store. But it is growing all the time, and I was only looking at some figures this morning, and our online store in the financial year just finished, 30th of June, was 43% up on the previous financial year, which was, the business generally was about 8% up. So you can see that that's where the growth is. Where will that end? Who knows? We probably won't get to the end before something else pops up and supersedes it. Throughout my career, it's always been one of my guiding principles to not get distracted by events that are not core to our business of selling shoes. If we ever needed a lawyer or an accountant or an architect or a financial advisor or tradesperson or whatever, then we paid for a professional. I think it saved us a lot of angst, we get a better job, and it probably cost us less in the long run. We've stuck to what we know, and that's selling shoes. That's what we know and understand. Now, I mentioned at the start of the presentation that I last spoke to this group about 5 years ago. And I did a check of some notes of those notes when I was preparing for today. And I've pulled out a couple of memory testers. So this is a last chance quiz for those that still covet one of our commemorative shoe horns. Can anyone tell me what the little plastic bit on the end of a shoelace is called? Come on, it starts with an A. Aglet. Well done, Liz. Aglet. Okay, the term barking dogs is an American term used to describe sore feet, and it led to the naming of a very famous shoe brand. Can anyone tell me that? Hush Puppies, correct, yeah. All right, is this an Oxford or a Derby lace shoe? Who said Derby? That's a Derby. That's an Oxford. Can you pick the difference? So the where's this? The Oxford comes to a little point at the bottom. You see where the laces are, and it's got like a V shape. It comes to a point. The Derby has two flaps that kind of come across and are laced together. And finally, last chance, what sport did Chuck Taylor play? Basketball. Peter, I think, got that one. In closing, I just want you to look at this photo of Randall Street from 1911. And the event is not the Grundys stocktake sale, as many of you may think. This photo hangs in our office, and people often remark, oh wow, wouldn't it have been great to have been selling hats in those days? You look at, everyone's got a hat on, and of course if you took that photo today, then there'd hardly be any hats on heads. But everyone would still be wearing shoes. Thank you.
That was fabulous. Thanks so much, Brenton. Now we've got time for questions. George. Okay.
Thank you. Look, I've been in South Australia only for 12 years. I'm from Mexico originally. In Mexico, the shoe culture is quite rich as well. So I'm very passionate about the way you run your business. And my question is specifically about how do you empower your staff members to actually reach this successful, business? So how do you actually bring them together with you to reach that goal?
That's a good question. We've always had a philosophy of looking after our staff and doing the right thing by them so that they want to stay with us. So I guess the first part of that is to choose your staff carefully and try and get the right people. Of course, it doesn't always work, but if you put a lot of energy into that process, then you have the right people with you, and as everyone would know, that makes a huge difference to any business. Then you need to do the right thing by them and respect them and train them and offer them good working conditions. And as part of that, we've never worked on a sales basis, like a commission type of basis. We work as a team within the stores, and I think that's probably as much as I can do to answer that question. Thank you. Yeah.
The question I've got for you is on family businesses, which is obviously it's something I've gone through myself, coming from a retail jewelry, not shoes, and I left that at the second generation because I realized that it was going to be very, very difficult to transition from my parents who started the business into us kids with all different attitude, interest, passions and things. What's been the key success element? Obviously there would have been many, but what's been, if you had to point on one thing that has made your family business succeed over the years, over so many generations, what would that be?
The business has only ever, even though we're in our 7th generation now, the ownership of the business is only still split 2 ways. And there's been a lot of family businesses that have got into their 4th, 5th, 6th generations, and ownership is split many, many different ways. And then you start to get various family members and various shareholders wanting to get out of the business or get some money for it and that sort of thing. And that, probably Michelle's here is a prime example of something like that occurring. So we've been very fortunate there in that shares in the business have only passed to family members that have worked in the business. But we've always had a philosophy that any family member that wanted to work in the business could, and several do. And as part of that handing down of the shares in the family, you tend to find that you never actually become a shareholder in the business until the former generation has passed away, and so you're probably retired by that stage. So it is one of the things that I have often thought about, is it's funny working in the business for all those years but never actually being a shareholder in it, and you tend to think that's probably not ideal, but from the point of view of the longevity of the company, I think that's really been key to it. Yeah.
Brenton, I'm an old retailer, One of the big problems I've found is the buying of stock, as you earlier related to. My wife has recently been into Grundys down the end of Randall Street, and a particular size shoe she could not find. And the big problem I found was that people like, well, I was in the surf industry and all sorts of things, but when you're buying clothing, they want to supply you not job lots, but pack lots. And they'd sell you 5 smalls, 2 medium, 1 large, and 6 extra large. And the most popular sizes are the large and the medium. So consequently, at the end of the season, you always had a heap of small and extra large left over. And this seems to be my wife's problem with her shoes, because unless she gets into your stores very early on, her size has been sold out. How do you overcome that problem?
Well, yeah, you don't really have control of that, so it's a very difficult problem to overcome, and it's one of those things that hasn't really changed, Rob. You buy a pack of 18 pairs of shoes, and once the popular sizes are gone, then you're stuck with the unpopular sizes, and you have to buy more of everything to get what you actually need. So suffice to say that there's never very many 8s, 9s and 10s on the sale table. There's always plenty of 5s and 13s. Yeah. Okay.
It was turned off. Brenton, thank you. We've had two fabulous stories in the last 2 weeks of family businesses, and you touched on another common theme towards the end of your presentation, and that is effectively sticking to your knitting, focusing on the shoe business, not being tempted to go into property development or clothing or any other thing. Do you want to just elaborate on that a bit more about the focusing on your core business?
Well, it's what we know and understand, and I think, again, a bit like the family getting split, or the ownership of business getting split many ways, a lot of businesses have come undone because they've diversified into areas that they didn't understand. And if I can give another example of that, probably trims might be an example of that. So it's been something that I've been pretty hot on. It's not to say that we haven't had discussions with other younger members of the family about areas that they might want to go in, and who knows where the business will go in the future. But we have stuck to selling shoes. However, having said that, it's also one of my principles, I guess, is that the business goes where the managing generation of the time takes it. So if now that I'm out of the business pretty much, and it's being run by the sixth generation, if they decide to take it in another direction, then that's where it'll go.
Well, I'm sure Brenton will be around for, I saw there were a couple more hands up, I'm sure he'll be happy to come and talk to you personally. So, Rotarians and guests, please can we stand to applaud Brenton Whittenbury and his fantastic family business. Thank you. Thank you.